ADHD is something that we're all dealing with somehow. We might not have kids in our home who are dealing with this, or be married to someone who, or we might not deal with it personally. But this impacts communities, it impacts classrooms, it impacts neighborhoods. This impacts all of us because we're all surrounded by kids in some fashion. And we want to help. So we want to get rid of
Last week, Studio 5 parenting contributor Heather Johnson debunked 5 myths surrounding attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It was extremely insightful, but you know what? The conversation isn't over. So today, Heather is here and she joins me in studio to tell us all we need to know about ADHD as parents, partners, and as people. Hey Heather, thanks for being here. You know, let's just start with the very basics for people. So like, what is ADHD?
So ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Oftentimes we say ADD, and to kind of straighten those things out, ADD is an old term. That term was used until the mid-1980s, and then about 1987 we added, or doctors added, the hyperactivity to ADD. So now, regardless of what your child exhibits, ADHD is the term we use today. So that's what we use.
Okay, I think that's good for people to know so we can be thoughtful. And we talked about we all need to know about this because someone in our lives were likely affected. And you mentioned children, but who does this affect? Only children?
Yeah, this is going to affect anyone, right? And oftentimes adults are also diagnosed. But when we're talking about kids today, we see that this impacts about 6 million kids between the ages of 3 and 17. We know that boys are more likely to get an ADHD diagnosis than girls are, and that with the diagnosis comes a number of other challenges, in particular anxiety. So about 3 out of every 10 kids who are diagnosed with ADHD are also diagnosed with anxiety and get that diagnosis too. When we look at ADHD, it tends to manifest itself in 3 different ways. It manifests itself as mostly inattentive, where kids have a hard time concentrating on tasks. They have a hard time following through with daily routines. That would be one way that we would see these symptoms manifest themselves. Then there is this space where they're mostly hyperactive, and you can kind of hear the ADD turn into ADHD as far as the terms we use, right? We bring in that hyperactivity. This is a child who is fidgety, who moves around all the time, who's constantly having a hard time sitting still. That would be the mostly hyperactive. And then oftentimes kids, and the third way it manifests, is that both come together and they have those different symptoms from both the inactivity or inattentiveness and also the hyperactivity.
Okay, so the symptoms that you're talking about, you gave us a few, but let's kind of go through these because we have them listed here and it's kind of long, the symptoms that we can see. So you talked about the trouble concentrating. Elaborate on that just a little bit.
Yeah, it would be just an inability or a hard time concentrating. And remember, like we've talked about, it doesn't have to mean that they don't know how to concentrate. They know how to concentrate, but they have a hard time concentrating on something that they're not interested in or don't care about. If they deem it bored, then they're going to have a hard time concentrating. These are kids that are going to daydream a lot. They are going to talk excessively. They, again, are going to have a really hard time sitting still, following through, especially on daily routines and remembering what needs to be done. All of these are symptoms. If you're seeing these things, our ears should prick up a little bit. We should go, hey, there's some interesting things going on here, and we want to pay a little bit more attention to them. Those would be some really common symptoms that we'd see.
I think a big question a lot of parents have is what is normal, quote unquote normal, because a lot of kids have a lot of those symptoms that you mentioned, and when should we be concerned?
Absolutely, and that is where we get caught up a little bit, right? Because if we're looking, for example, at a diagnosis, and boys, for example, tend to get hit with the hyperactivity part, especially between the ages of 7 and 9. Well, if any of us have a son at home, we know that they're really active between 7 and 9, and they have a hard time sitting still, and they love to fidget and jump and play and jump off of everything. And so it's hard to distinguish the difference between. You can look and see that if these things aren't changing with traditional parenting practices, and if these symptoms are occurring and staying with your child over time as they continue to grow, it would be worth looking at, right, if they keep going. So if this is happening when a child is 5, 6, 7, and then they hit 12 and you're like, these things are still such a huge challenge, it would be a really good time for you to decide, let's go have this looked at. Let's see what we can do. Right?
Okay, you talked a little bit about anxiety as maybe one, I don't know if that is a cause or a symptom, but are there actual causes of ADHD?
Yeah, we have a hard time saying that there's a hard and fast cause, right? The best that we can do, though, that the medicine says, is first that genetics can cause ADHD. Also environmental risks, especially in utero or when a baby is very, very young. and anything environmentally that they're exposed to, that could potentially do it. We have now linked ADHD as a cause to premature birth and also low birth weight, that those things tend to show up as a cause of ADHD. We do know, though, quite a few things that do not cause ADHD, and they're important to talk about. What doesn't cause ADHD is too much sugar. Too much television does not cause ADHD. Parenting practices that might not be healthy do not cause ADHD. Family chaos is also another one. Oftentimes we'll hear people say, well, everything that's going on in your home, that's caused your child to have ADHD. There is nothing that supports that those things cause ADHD. Now, they could contribute, meaning once there's a diagnosis or a child has ADHD, they can make it more challenging, right? Diet does matter. More sugar is going to impact them, or more screen time will impact them. But those are not causes of ADHD, and we want to keep that in mind.
But possibly could exacerbate a situation, you're saying?
They could.
Okay.
They could. Yeah, and if you're in that situation, we also want to talk about what treatment looks like, because I think parents get in this situation, we go, what would this even look like if this is a diagnosis or a disorder that my child is dealing with? Treatment finds itself falling under two categories. The first is we're going to look at behavioral modification, and the second is medication. Doctors will always push behavioral modification first. This is where a child better learns tools to manage how their brain thinks, and where parents learn the tools to parent a child whose brain thinks from an ADHD space.
And is that something where your physician would give you those tools? Are they going to send you somewhere else to get those tools, just give you reading material? What's the most common?
It could be both and all of the above. When you're looking to figure this out, go to your primary care doctor, go to your pediatrician, tell them your concerns. They will most likely send you to a child psychiatrist or someone who specializes in ADHD. Once you get there and you talk to them, they will then help you find a best path. There's classes, there's reading material, there's even doctors who just teach it in their office. Once the behavior modification has been looked at, if it's not helping in ways that get the results, if the child doesn't feel under control, then they're going to introduce medicine. And most doctors will wait until they're kind of 6, 7, right around there to consider that. But the very best approach is do it hand in hand. Take both of those treatments, talk to your doctor, and bring them together. That's when we see those really beautiful outcomes happen. And if you're concerned about any of this, go talk to a doctor sooner than later. The sooner that you get your child in to talk about these things and figure out if it's a diagnosis that you need, the better you are at attending to it, and the better they are set up to success as they grow into adulthood. They learn to manage it much quicker.
That was going to be my last question, is if you think, oh, my child could possibly have ADHD, would you say first, maybe go online, do some research, or would your first step just be go talk to your primary care physician?
I think all of us probably go online first. It's probably where we go first, right? We kind of decide that Google's going to be the doctor, and it would be pretty normal to get on and Google more of the symptoms and do some of that, flesh some of that research out yourself. But from there, reach out to a doctor who knows what they're talking about and who knows your child and can help with it. They will run them through a series of tests. They will run hearing tests. They will run some vision tests. They will make sure that these are not symptoms of something else, right? That the reason they're not following through is just because they can't hear, but instead it's ADHD. They'll run all those things through. And then you know that you've got the backing of someone who specializes in it, and you can feel more confident as a parent making your treatment decisions and moving forward with everything.
I love that advice, because we had that exact thing happen with my daughter. I thought she was ignoring me all the time and being defiant. She had earwax in her ear, and we just took that trip to the doctor. Thank you so much, Heather.
Yep.
And if you want to refer back to this chat, you can find it on our website.